Hello and welcome to Financial Planning Unlocked, brought to you by Rathbones Financial Planning, where we look at key financial planning topics for you and your family. The contents of this podcast do not constitute a recommendation or advice, and no action should be taken without seeking advice from a financial planner.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Kennedy, a financial planner at Rathbones, and I'm here with my colleague Ollie Cheng. So our first podcast discussed the main findings of the Financial Wellbeing Report, and this podcast is looking at the differences between gender, geography, and occupation. So while there are consistent concerns and motivations expressed by all high net worth individuals that we interviewed, there are some distinct differences between genders. So when it comes to financial well-being, how does it differ and what can we draw from that? So it seems from the findings that the most important concern for women is a deterioration in well-being and other walks of life, i.e. mental and physical, whereas men are more concerned about a long-term rise in inflation. So research has shown that men tend to concentrate on macro themes, such as inflation and geopolitics, whereas women are more focused on meeting their personal goals and the well-being of themselves and their family.
And generally from us, we want to push everyone towards that latter way of thinking, actually. You know, for us, what we do is hugely objective based. As an individual, you have certain financial goals you want to meet. And our job is not necessarily to try to mean you have the biggest number with a pound sign in front of it. Our job is to make sure you meet those personal objectives. So actually aligning with that tends to work very well for us, I think. In
line with that as well, the results showed that men are less concerned about stock market volatility, for example, compared to women. And we tend to see that trend in day-to-day dealings with clients. For example, when we do our Oxford risk questionnaires, the results tend to be lower risk for women compared to the men who come back with higher risk.
Definitely when you take it through an average. It's not across the board. We deal with plenty of women who come out with really high risk profiles. We deal with plenty of men who come out wanting really low volatility on their portfolios. But once you do average it out across everyone, there is a definite trend there.
And I think they do say, generally speaking, that women tend to be more likely to have savings, but those savings are likely to be in cash as opposed to stocks and shares, which then limits the potential for capital growth and the size of that pot over a longer time horizon.
Definitely. And it's a big conversation we have with a lot of people, actually. It's making people understand that risk, because we use the word risk for what we do quite often. And actually, a lot of the time when we say risk, we actually mean volatility. And it's really important, I think, to break that down for people and say, well, when we're saying this is higher risk, what we actually mean is it will be more volatile. But there are other risks that you get from staying in cash. You know, inflation is a risk in itself. And if you've got cash with, what, let's be honest, over most times is not necessarily an inflation beating return. It is at the moment. But actually, that's a risk in itself. Is your money going to be inflated away? Is it going to be worth less because you've chosen the cash option? So actually choosing a risk profile is often about balancing a number of risks. And that's, I think, the way these conversations go. And perhaps for us, depending on gender, people are more conscious of some risks than others. And actually our job is to probably bring the rest of them in and make sure that's a wider conversation.
And there's no right or wrong perspective to have. It's just making sure that the needs are balanced between both parties so they're comfortable with the approach taken for their portfolio.
One other thing we've seen going through this is how much men and women value conversations and who with. So what we've seen from the stats is that women really value having those family conversations about money. They want to speak to their partner, but also they're more likely to want to bring their children into that conversation as well, make sure everyone is on board, everyone is making decisions together. Whereas I think for men, the tilt is slightly more towards going, the priority is for me to talk to my advisor and make sure I'm getting that good advice in there.
Yeah, and for us as advisors, I think it's important for us to make sure that both parties are brought into the conversation and both parties come along to the review meetings so that we can make sure that we're on the same page.
Definitely. It's something historically where we've had to push back against, because you do get scenarios where one person goes, well, I'm the finance person. And they come along to the meetings and they talk to us. And actually, even if the partner trusts them with it, is quite happy to delegate, there's huge value in getting them in the room. You often just get little insights that come out from that second person. And sometimes it's about the various risks we're trying to mitigate and how they feel. But sometimes it's other things as well. Sometimes it is objectives. I've sat down with a couple before and you're really pushing, going, what do you want retirement to look like? And one of them has come out with the holiday home, visions of grandkids running down the beach in Cornwall idea. And the other partners just turned to look at them going, I've never heard this before. And it was really, really important to get out there. Whether it's the right thing for them or not, whole different point. And it's something we can work through and work out. But you need all of that on the table, because actually if one person makes all the decisions, the other person's got a dream in their head that never quite gets expressed, you may never actually see some of those things come to fruition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's important in the meetings as well to make sure there is that focus on the financial plan and the objectives, because if the meeting is focused purely on the big picture, the macro environment, inflation, investment performance, you run the risk of then both parties not feeling fully engaged in the financial journey.
Definitely.
That's where you can lose some of that.
And even things that you may have in your head as a personal decision rather than a family decision. Actually, if you're the main breadwinner for a family, well, when you retire affects everybody. And not just from a financial sense. You may be thinking, well, as long as I work at least long enough to make sure we've got enough money, great. But actually, a lot of the plans, a lot of things your partner, your family want to do may involve you freeing up some time somewhere. And again, that conversation has to happen with everyone in the room.
And it's also clear from the research that women tend to feel less financially confident with men when it comes to dealing with finances. And I think a way that we can help is making sure we're not using too much jargon. So of course in finance, there's always going to be an element of jargon, but if we can reduce the amount of jargon we use as much as possible, then that will make both parties feel more engaged.
Yep. And at this point, I'm really hoping that when we listen back to this, that doesn't sound too bad, because we may well have thrown it in somewhere. Apologies if we have.
Okay, and now should we move on to the geographical differences? The findings from the Wellbeing Report said that high net worth individuals in the north were more concerned about geopolitical instability and a slowdown in the economy versus those in the south who are more concerned about tax changes and a potential collapse in the property market. So I think it's probably fair to say that given the difference in house prices between the north and the south, that's probably why that's one of the main concerns for those in the southeast and London.
Definitely. I think particularly London, housing, house prices, getting your children on the property ladder, all of these things are so relevant because house prices have gotten so high and have just continued to do so for such a long period. Actually, if you work the same role, and we deal with lots of professionals where we'll deal with partners in London, we'll deal with partners in Newcastle, they'll be on similar pay. But actually where their overall wealth ends up is so different, because if you are in London, there's that focus. I want the home I want. And actually, realistically, most of our clients who want a nice home in London are paying 7 figures for it. And that shapes their overall wealth. When we do a financial plan, and most of you will now have seen that chart, I hope, going, this is where your wealth sits over the years, this is how it moves around. That part at the bottom that represents the property is huge. And when that's such a big percentage of your wealth, it's naturally going to lead into worries. What happens if I do lose a lot of value from it? What happens if I need to unlock that value? Do I need to downsize? These are huge questions where actually, if a lot of your wealth is in investment accounts, it's not going to feel the same way.
That's exactly right. And the results showed as well that people in London are less concerned about creating a legacy compared to those in the north of the country. And that's perhaps driven by the fact that those in London gift more throughout their lifetime to help with the property deposits to get their children on the property ladder.
I think that's it. That is the big fear. It's what if this property market that I've benefited from has run away from my children and they can't do the same things I did. And we've all seen the stats. We all know it's true. Actually, property prices today as a multiple of incomes are much higher than probably they've ever been. So it's such a big concern, can I get my children the property ladder? And actually, I think there's this sigh of relief when you've done that. Okay, all of my children are in good careers, they're all housed, great. That's it, I've done my job. And everything else at that point can become, great, well, what have we got left? What does retirement look like? Let's go and enjoy it.
And I think a lot of clients actually feel more comfortable gifting money directly for a property as opposed to gifting a large lump sum of money, which the child can then, spend.
Definitely. And I think there's a huge timing thing with it as well, isn't there? Sort of, if you want to help your child onto the property ladder, it's got to be done early, ultimately. There's no point making those decisions when your child is in their mid-40s. This is something that's got to be done probably late 20s, early 30s at latest, because you want that stability before your children have their own children.
And then in terms of the occupational differences, so we interviewed different individuals, and lawyers and accountants came out different in terms of their feelings towards the ability to have control of their finances. So lawyers felt more concerned that they didn't have the ability to control their finances compared to accountants. Lawyers were more concerned about inflation compared to accountants, and accountants were more concerned about general well-being.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing here is, and I know it's a stereotype, but we see lots of accountants come in with their spreadsheet, with everything plugged in, with their own growth rates assumed, going, okay, this is what's coming in, this is where it's going, this is how I'm assuming we're going to live over the next few years. They've done so much of that planning themselves because that kind of thing is second nature to a lot of these people. Whereas actually, the lawyers tend to come in with much less of an idea. Again, it's a stereotype, it's not true across the board, but I think you're more likely to see them come in and go, okay, I've been saving into pensions, I've made sure I put money away, but I've got 3-4 pensions. To be honest, I don't even know the total. Can you have a look at it for me? And so it's a slightly different task to get those people into the right position, I think. They're usually in a great, strong financial position anyway, but they just don't quite have all the information processed in the same way, I think.
Yes, I think that's where the cash flow plan is really helpful. It helps answer questions such as, have I got enough to retire? And if so, how much can I spend in retirement? I think that's what's really valuable, to see that in a graphical format.
Definitely. And it's such a flexible tool as well, because even if you haven't worked the numbers through yourself, you'll still have the questions. Oh, that's great. You're telling me I can spend that much. What if we up that by 10%? What does it look like? What if I give away this money tomorrow? What does that look like? What if I retire earlier? And actually, we can very, very easily plot all those scenarios for you. I think that's hugely valuable. I think it's one of the biggest things we do is giving people that information well in advance of making big life decisions. You want to retire, early.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing it on an annual basis as well gives you the peace of mind of seeing that you're in a good position year after year. It gives you the confidence that actually, even though we've had a bad year in the markets, for example, I can still afford to retire at age 60. I think it does help build that picture over time.
Definitely. For relevance here, when we've looked at careers here, I think for those who are Rathbones clients who perhaps haven't got the background working with Saunderson House that some of our clients do, it's worth noting that historically in this report, we have looked at lawyers and accountants as two key groups. That's a reflection of Saunderson House and our business, that we've always worked with a lot of people from those industries. And therefore, we've sort of over the years looked at the differences and perhaps how that can influence our way of working with these people.
Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you found it helpful.
Thanks very much, everyone.